co-founder of a dev talent agency called SuperBuilt. Now, what is SuperBuilt? We are a talent partner for growing startups, agencies, etc., mostly based in the US. And what we do is we find folks who are otherwise unfindable in Europe, engineers, programmers, front-end devs, etc., and present them as super qualified candidates to folks who are trying to grow their engineering teams. So this will probably be one of a multi-part series on just how to scale dev, how to hire engineers, etc. And what we're trying to do here is just to have a no holds barred, just very honest, open conversation about what are the challenges of that, how do we overcome that, what are the different options out there, and so on. So I guess to get started, a little bit of background about myself. I'm an engineer by trade. I don't actually like using the term engineer all the time because there are licensed engineers and then there's software engineers and lab engineers, but I consider myself a developer or programmer, and that started when I was pretty young, I'd say middle school, high school, early days of the web, very 1.0, and just messing around and teaching myself how to code. I imagine that most folks in the industry, elder millennials, Gen Z folks, kind of got in with that type of experience. There's a lot of folks who did not go to college, didn't go to technical schools, etc., who are incredibly capable problem solvers, engineers, etc. So, my story is one of being self-taught, but there's also a lot of folks out there who have been through very rigorous programs as well. And I've hired from both sets of groups. So I started out working for software companies, later hardware companies, figuring out the web by being on small startup teams and kind of just being thrown in these different situations. Like, hey, do you know how Google Ads works? And I was like, no, but I can figure out how, and eventually try doing this, trying doing that, and trial and error equals experience, right? So over the last 20 some years have built a career figuring out hard problems that involve digital transactions and websites, which really means at the end of the day e-commerce. But I've worked with a lot of different businesses and startups and so forth in different verticals. And at the end of the day, if there's something that needs doing, that is a technical problem that needs solving, you're probably going to have engineering needs to figure that out. Now, AI, of course, is the elephant in the room. It's a very large elephant. It's an elephant that's reproducing rapidly and creating other elephants. But it's not going to replace the industry. I feel fairly confident in that because tools are tools, and the tools that we've had to use throughout the course of computer engineering from the 60s on have been radically different, decade by decade, year after year, and that hasn't replaced the need for orchestration, for ingenuity, for invention, for architecting different things. Maybe what a developer is will change over the next few years for sure, and what are the skill sets that we need, but we're always looking for folks who are multifaceted, right, who have interesting different backgrounds, who like solving different kinds of problems, who are not stuck in a lane, who are not overly reliant on any one technology, because we know platforms change, technologies change, new standards come out. I would say really like email programming, creating email newsletters is like the still stuck in web 1.0 in terms of how those are done and the type of inputs we have, but everything else on the web, except for email, I can fairly confidently say has evolved pretty significantly since even I've been doing this. So what do we look for when we're looking for engineering teams, or looking for individual contributors, or looking for leads, or looking for programmers in general? I think there's some commonalities that really are going to be omnipresent no matter what type of business you have, right? And first and foremost, you are looking for someone who likes to solve problems. That's kind of why I got into this business. That's why I've been engaged with it. That's why I've rolled with all the punches and figured out what are the different ways that the space can evolve and so on. You need people who are curious and who want to figure out the puzzles. There's no accident why there's a huge Venn diagram overlap of gamers and programmers, right? It's like people who like solving riddles, puzzles, digging into the why of why is this like this. I think there's all stories about people end up being programmers as kids, disassembling electrical components as toddlers, right? There's this just like curiosity of like not accepting the status quo in a certain sense. And I think that is also a reputation that we get in terms of being mavericks or people who are kind of going against the grain. And also, folks who just really want to solve things and get a lot of personal satisfaction about that. The other thing that I think is a common denominator is really the ability to think in a really deep and nuanced way about systems. So we would call this systems thinking. And not everyone has this. There's a lot of people who come into the world and they look at things and are like, oh, that's cool, and move on. Developers are not those people. Again, that need to know that deeper understanding once you start unraveling things and realizing the complexity of all these different components that constitute all of the systems that create and our built environment, our daily lives. I've known a lot of architects who became developers and vice versa, right? There's an actual understanding and willingness to understand and interest and intellectual engagement with the understanding of, again, why are these things built, how are they structured, and that translates into creating data models, into creating databases, into creating these things that are the structure of how we build on the internet. And then one of the things that's often ignored, but is something that at SuperBuilt we're really focused on, is soft skills. So a lot of people think, okay, engineer, care about systems, you care about how things are built, you're putting 1 + 1 + 1 together and getting 3, and then scaffolding that, and doing this and doing that and doing the other, and you're creating all these systems, and you're so data driven, you're so narrowly focused, and people forget that engineers are humans too, at least for the moment, right? And that you have to actually care about the problem you're trying to solve. There's a lot of people would pick up a box and look at it and say, oh, that's interesting, and drop that box and move to something else and keep on moving to something else, right? That toddler mentality of being curious about a lot of things, but not deeply engaged, or not without the deep attention and purpose into figuring out something. And that's something that is much harder to express. It's much harder to find, to screen for, to suss out. At the end of the day, this is, I think, why AI doesn't win everything, is because AI doesn't care. AI doesn't have empathy. AI emulates kindness or caring and simulates the processes which it sees and mimics from human training data. But ultimately, if you're going to have an engaged team member, if you're going to have an engineer who actually solves problems and doesn't just put out some fires in the meantime, you need people who actually give a crap about what they're doing, right? And determining what motivates someone, what their engagement is, who they care about, why they care about it, etc., is something that can be determined through conversation, through real human connection, through interview process, through different assessments, etc. But it's something that is not an instant bullet point that you can read from a resume. It's not something that AI can do deterministically, even though there are AI screening software companies now for interviews, it doesn't work well for a reason, because we connect with people as people, right? And I think that was one of the core missteps of the ideation of the metaverse, is that everything gets replaced with avatars. Humans do not want to talk to an avatar. They want to talk to another human. And we as humans want to connect with people. And if we have a deep knowledge and emotional intelligence, EQ, if you want to call it that, that also has to be paired with IQ. That also has to be a part of this equation. And the more we do agentic and automated recruiting, and we have these vast menus of different people to pull from, and look at their leaderboards and this stat and that stat, okay, this is going to be great match. I fundamentally believe that's not going to work long term. You're going to get some hits, but you're going to get a lot of misses as well. And so intrinsically, what we're trying to do is actually kind of remove the automation and go back to basics and saying, like, this is about connection, and this is about trust, and this is about really understanding each other. And with AI is great at solving narrow and deep problems, but we humans are messy, and businesses are messy, and there's so much unstructured data, and there's so much unspoken implied information, and there's so much that goes into onboarding that will not be successful if you just read from a script, right? And that's the kind of area that we're playing in. We're trying to bring still a framework to, and if you want to call that an algorithm, sure. But what we're trying to do is bring discipline to that practice, but not replace the practice with automation. And also, when looking at engineers, I talked a little bit about motivation. You have to understand how much of a challenge is the right amount of challenge and how much is too much. And what I would call disappearing developer syndrome is when folks get in way over their heads, and then it's just easier just to back away and just ghost and quit and so forth, and just go on to the next gig. And again, that's where that X factor of sort of the caring, the caring about craft, the caring about the team, the personal connections, etc. Really, when the going gets tough, you want someone who can really not only pull their weight, but pull more weight than they thought they could do, and being inspired to do that, and of course, matching that with a balance so that there's not burnout and so on. But that's something that we're looking closely at as well. So why do I mention all this? Well, historically, it's been pretty hard to hire developers who aren't mercenaries, who aren't just going on to the next salary level and the next opportunity that has a bigger number on it. Because there's always going to be companies out there that are bigger than yours, that pay more than yours, even if you are competitive in your market, in your area, etc. We live in this connected world, which is amazing, but there's also a lot of people out there, a lot of competitors out there who can try to eat your lunch or try to take your team, right? So one of the things that we're looking at is, okay, well, what are the things that people actually care about? Why are people inspired to solve a problem together? And that can also kind of fall into different archetypes. So as a agency leader for over 13 years, what I've found is that there's developers who are super interested in solving one huge problem for a very long time, right? Those monolithic projects where it's like, we're going to build this huge piece of software, this huge thing, and it's going to take 6 months, and that's all I'm going to work on day in, day out. I'm going to chip away at this huge problem little by little by little, and therefore never feel any extreme pressure on any one thing or any one day, because the project is so long term that I don't need a ton of short-term deadlines, right? And that's definitely a type. Like, that's something that tracks for folks who are interested in that and folks who think that's incredibly boring, right? And not to say one is right or wrong, but it's different. And then there's kind of the opposite, where in the agency world, we're looking for people who want to be super dynamic and they want to be jumping around. They want to be working on multiple projects, multiple clients, multiple things. I want a little bit of a small project. I want a chunk of a big project. I want to be simultaneously working on a, soup to nuts website build that'll take 3 months, while also knocking out some small things in the meantime that give me the satisfaction, that dopamine of having something done and completed and checked off the list. And that's another type. And so the type of engineer that you actually need to look for is going to be different depending on your organization. But often we don't ask those questions. We don't figure out, is this applicant really understanding what the type of workflow we have is, what the type of kind of micro reward systems we have, whether there's someone who chafes at deadlines versus thrives on deadlines. And that can often be overlooked. So these are just some of the concepts that we're going to toss around in this series and get into with more depth. Definitely let me know in the comments, what are your biggest challenges? What have you been seeing? What have been the gotchas that you've experienced? Or if you are an engineer yourself and you're looking to be recruited, what are the toughest things you find in terms of how you communicate your craft, your practice, and yourself, and how that comes across to recruiters, etc. I'm happy to get into that as well. And thanks so much for watching.